John Morrison wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag. The maintenance bay of Luna Station was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air recyclers. He had been working on the same broken water pump for 3 hours. It was tedious work, but someone had to do it. His tablet beeped with an incoming message. John looked at the screen and frowned. The message was not from Earth or Luna Station Command. It was from somewhere far away in space. The header showed symbols he had never seen before. Priority transmission, the tablet announced in its flat computer voice. Language protocols activated. Translation beginning. John set down his tools and touched the screen. The symbols changed into English words. As he read, his eyes grew wide. To the human representative, you are summoned to appear before the Interstellar Council at Station Nexus 7 in the Proxima Centauri system. Earth's assigned representative has failed to appear. As the only human currently in this sector, you will serve as emergency representative. Compliance is required under Galactic Treaty 247-B. Transport will arrive in 6 hours. John read the message 3 times. He had never heard of the Interstellar Council. He had no idea Earth even had representatives to alien governments. Most humans barely knew that aliens existed at all. Sure, there had been some contact in recent years. Alien ships sometimes passed through human space. They traded small amounts of technology for raw materials, but John thought that was all there was to it. He looked around the empty maintenance bay. He was just a repair guy. He fixed broken machines and cleaned air filters. Why would aliens want to talk to him? His tablet beeped again. This time it was a call from Earth Command. Captain Sarah Chen appeared on the screen. She looked worried. Morrison, we just got word about the Council's summons, she said. We need you to go. Captain, I think there's been a mistake, John replied. I'm just maintenance crew. I don't know anything about alien politics. Neither did our real representative, Chen said with a bitter laugh. Ambassador Williams was supposed to handle this, but his ship went missing 3 days ago somewhere near Jupiter. We've lost contact completely. John felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Missing? We don't know what happened. Maybe engine failure, maybe something else. The point is, you're our only option right now. There's no time to send someone else from Earth. The council session starts in 12 hours. But I don't know what to say to them. I don't even know what this is about. Captain Chen's expression grew more serious. According to our limited information, they're having some kind of hearing about humanity. About whether we're ready to be an independent species or if we need supervision. Supervision? John asked. Like babysitters, Morrison. Alien babysitters who would make all our decisions for us. Chen paused. Look, I know this isn't your job, but you're smart. You know how to think on your feet. And right now, you're humanity's only voice at that table. An hour later, John found himself on an alien transport ship. The vessel was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of living metal that shifted and moved. Strange lights pulsed through the corridors. The alien crew members looked like tall, thin spiders made of blue glass. They mostly ignored him. The journey to the council station took 8 hours. John spent the time reading everything he could find about alien species and galactic politics on his tablet. Most of the information was vague and outdated. Humans clearly knew very little about the wider galaxy. What John did learn worried him. The Interstellar Council was made up of 12 different alien species. They had been working together for thousands of years. They controlled most of the known galaxy. Humans were considered newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. When the transport arrived at the council station, John pressed his face against the small window. The station was enormous. It looked like a giant crystal city floating in space. Ships from dozens of different species docked at hundreds of ports. John could see creatures that looked like floating jellyfish directing traffic alongside robots the size of buildings. The glass spider aliens led him through the station corridors. John felt very small and very human. Other aliens stopped to stare at him as he passed. Some pointed and made sounds that might have been laughter. Others seemed to ignore him completely, as if he was not worth noticing. The council chamber was a vast circular room with 12 elevated platforms. Each platform held representatives from different alien species. John recognized none of them from his reading. There were beings made of shifting light, creatures that looked like walking trees, and things that appeared to be collections of floating rocks. In the center of the chamber was a small platform with a simple chair. This was where John was supposed to sit. A being that looked like a giant praying mantis covered in purple scales spoke first. The translation device in John's ear turned its clicking sounds into words. The human representative will take his position. We begin the evaluation of species 7834H, known locally as humanity. John walked to the center platform. His work boots echoed loudly in the quiet chamber. He sat down in the chair and looked up at the 12 alien species that would decide his people's fate. A creature, made of what appeared to be living crystal, began to speak. This session will determine whether the human species requires direct supervision due to primitive development and dangerous tendencies. Evidence will be presented by council members. John felt sweat on his forehead, despite the cool air in the chamber. He was just one man in work clothes, sitting before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They would decide whether humanity remained free or became slaves. But as John looked around the chamber, he began to notice things, small details that others might miss. He had spent years maintaining complex systems. He knew how to see the hidden connections, the weak points, the things that others overlooked. The 12 council species might control the galaxy, but John was starting to realize that their system had flaws. And if there were flaws, there might be opportunities. He just had to be very careful about how he found them. The giant crystal being continued speaking. Its voice sounded like breaking glass when it talked. We will now present evidence of human primitiveness and unfitness for independence. John pulled out his old tablet and started taking notes. Several alien representatives seemed amused by this. A creature that looked like a floating cloud of green gas made a sound that the translator called laughter. The first to present evidence was a species that looked like walking trees with silver bark. Their representative stepped forward with smooth, flowing movements. Humans show clear signs of developmental failure, the tree being said. They have destroyed large portions of their home planet's ecosystem. Their oceans are poisoned. Their air is thick with industrial waste. This shows they cannot manage resources properly. John wrote this down carefully. He remembered the news reports about pollution and climate change. It was true that Earth had problems. But he also remembered something else. In recent years, many of those problems had been getting better, not worse. New technologies were cleaning the oceans. The air in most cities was cleaner than it had been in decades. But John didn't say anything yet. Next came a species that looked like giant insects with too many legs and eyes that glowed red. Their representative made clicking sounds that the translator turned into angry words. Humans are violent and unstable, the insect being declared. They fight constant wars among themselves. Even now, they maintain weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They cannot be trusted with advanced technology. John added this to his notes. He thought about the wars and weapons on Earth, but he also thought about the peace treaties and the international cooperation projects. The aliens seemed to only know about the bad parts of human history. A creature made of flowing water spoke next. It had no solid form, just a constantly shifting mass of liquid held together by some kind of force field. Human psychology is chaotic and unpredictable, the water being said. Their neural patterns show extreme variation. They cannot think as a unified species. Each individual acts according to personal desires, rather than collective good. John found this interesting. The aliens seemed to think that humans thinking differently from each other was a bad thing. But in his experience, having different ideas and perspectives usually led to better solutions. The presentations continued for hours. Each alien species listed reasons why humans were not ready for independence. They talked about human technology being primitive. They mentioned that humans had only recently learned to travel to other stars. They pointed out that human lifespans were short and their bodies were weak. Through it all, John sat quietly and took notes. He noticed that the aliens were very confident. They spoke about humans the way humans might talk about children or pets. Some of them seemed bored by the whole process, as if the outcome was already decided. But John was starting to see patterns in what they said. The aliens knew some things about humanity, but they had big gaps in their knowledge. They knew about human wars, but not about human peace. They knew about pollution, but not about cleanup efforts. They knew about human weapons, but not about human art, music, or literature. More importantly, John was beginning to understand how the aliens saw the galaxy. They spoke about order and stability and proper development. They seemed to believe that all species should grow and change in the same way. Any species that was different was considered dangerous or primitive. The crystal being spoke again. The evidence is clear. Humanity requires supervision until they can properly develop along approved guidelines. What kind of supervision? John asked. It was the first time he had spoken since the session began. Several aliens turned to look at him with what might have been surprise. The crystal being's faceted surface reflected the chamber lights as it answered. Standard protocols for developing species. Humans would be relocated to appropriate reservation worlds where they can grow under proper guidance. Earth would be managed by council-appointed administrators to repair the environmental damage. John felt his blood turn cold. They weren't just talking about supervision. They were talking about taking Earth away from humanity entirely. How long would this supervision last? He asked. Until humanity proves it can think and act properly, replied a being that looked like a collection of floating metal spheres. Previous species have required anywhere from 500 to 2,000 years of guidance. John wrote this down, but his hand was shaking slightly. 2,000 years. That was longer than all of recorded human history. I see, John said quietly. And how many species have successfully completed this supervision program? The chamber grew silent. The aliens exchanged what might have been glances, though it was hard to tell with creatures so different from humans. Finally, the crystal being answered. That information is not relevant to this proceeding. But John noticed they didn't answer his question. He made a note about that too. I request permission to study the Council's historical records before presenting humanity's defense, John said. 3 days should be sufficient. The aliens made various sounds that might have been discussion. Finally, the insect being clicked what sounded like agreement. The human representative will be given access to basic historical records. 3 cycles are granted for preparation. John stood up from his chair. Thank you. I also request access to the station's technical specifications and cultural databases for research purposes. Granted, said the tree being, with what sounded like amusement. Though we doubt a maintenance worker will understand such complex information. John nodded politely and left the chamber. As he walked through the corridors, he could hear some of the aliens making sounds that the translator told him were laughter. They thought he was just a simple repairman who was in over his head. They had given him access to their records because they believed he was too primitive to understand what he was looking at. But John Morrison had not told them everything about himself. He had not mentioned his 12 years in military intelligence before he became a maintenance worker. He had not talked about his training in system analysis and strategic planning. He had not explained why he had really chosen to work alone on a remote station. As he was escorted to a small room where he could work, John allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had just made their first mistake. They had underestimated him. Over the next 3 days, John would find out what that mistake would cost them. John's assigned quarters were small but comfortable. The walls showed holographic displays of peaceful alien landscapes that changed every few minutes. A food dispenser provided meals that looked strange but tasted decent. To anyone watching, he appeared to be a simple human trying to understand complex alien politics. But appearances were deceiving. John had not survived 12 years in military intelligence by being careless. His first night in the quarters, he carefully examined every surface for monitoring devices. He found 3 different types of surveillance equipment. 2 were obvious, cameras and audio pickups that any visitor would expect. The third was more subtle, a device that monitored brain activity through the walls. Fortunately, John had trained for situations like this. He pulled a small device from his toolkit that looked like a standard maintenance scanner. To alien observers, it would appear he was just checking the room's systems. In reality, he was creating electronic interference that would make his thoughts unreadable to their monitors. The next morning, John began his research. He started with the obvious materials, basic histories of the Council species, and general information about galactic politics. But while he read these files, he was actually mapping the station's computer network. His maintenance credentials gave him access to technical systems throughout the station. After all, he might need to repair something while he was there. The aliens saw this as logical and harmless. They had no idea that John's 12 years of intelligence work had taught him how to turn maintenance access into something much more powerful. By the end of his first day, John had identified the main data storage systems, communication networks, and security protocols. More importantly, he had found several weaknesses in their setup. The Council species were very advanced, but they had been working together for so long that they had become careless about internal security. They assumed that no one inside the station would ever work against them. On his second day, John began digging deeper. He used his tablet to access historical records that went back thousands of years. What he found there made his blood run cold. The Council had not always been 12 species. Originally, it had been just 3. Over the centuries, they had encountered 47 other spacefaring species. According to the records, 31 of those species had been integrated into the Council system. 16 had been relocated for developmental assistance. John read through the files carefully. The language was formal and polite, but the meaning was clear. The 31 integrated species had become servants or slaves. The 16 relocated species had simply disappeared from the records after a few hundred years. None of the species that had gone through supervision had ever graduated from the program. But that was not the worst part. John found planning documents that were only a few months old. The Council had already begun preparations for humanity's relocation. They had selected 3 small planets on the edge of the galaxy where humans would be sent. They had calculated how many humans each planet could support. The numbers were much smaller than Earth's current population. They had also made detailed plans for Earth itself. Once humans were relocated, the planet would be strip-mined for its resources. The oceans would be drained. The atmosphere would be processed for valuable gases. Within 50 years, Earth would be nothing but a dead rock. John sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. The Council was not interested in helping humanity develop. They were planning genocide on a scale that was hard to imagine. But John forced himself to keep reading. If he was going to stop this, he needed to understand everything. As he dug deeper into the files, John began to notice something interesting. The Council was not as unified as they pretended to be. 3 of the current member species had been conquered, rather than integrated as partners. Their representatives at the Council meetings were essentially prisoners who had to follow orders from the dominant species. Two other species were showing signs of rebellion. Their internal communications, which John managed to access through the maintenance network, showed growing dissatisfaction with Council leadership. They were particularly unhappy about recent resource allocation decisions that favored the three original Council species. Even more interesting, John discovered that several Council species were afraid of each other. The crystal beings and the insect-like creatures had been competing for dominance for centuries. The tree beings and the floating gas clouds had territorial disputes that were barely contained by Council politics. The Interstellar Council ruled the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force, but their alliance was much more fragile than they wanted anyone to know. On his third day, John made his most important discovery. While accessing the station's maintenance logs, he found records of a ship that had docked briefly 2 weeks earlier. The ship was listed as a priority diplomatic vessel carrying important Council business. The timing was suspicious. John cross-referenced the dates with his knowledge of Ambassador Williams' travel schedule. The ship had been at the station exactly when Williams should have been arriving for the Council session. But Williams had never made it to the station. His ship had disappeared near Jupiter. John dug deeper into the records of the diplomatic vessel. It belonged to the insect-like species that had spoken so strongly against humanity during the Council session. The ship had arrived at the station with no prior announcement and had left just 6 hours later. That was enough time to dispose of evidence from an assassination. John sat in his small quarters, staring at the data on his tablet. The Council had murdered humanity's representative to ensure that no one could speak effectively in Earth's defense. They had expected no replacement to arrive, which would have given them an excuse to proceed with their plans immediately. But they had not counted on John being in the right place at the right time. They had not expected a maintenance worker to have the skills to uncover their crimes. Most importantly, they had not realized that John was not alone. John opened a new file on his tablet and began composing a message. It was addressed to a contact on Earth that no one else knew about. The message looked like a routine maintenance report about space station systems, but hidden in the technical language was a detailed intelligence summary of everything John had discovered. It also contained specific instructions for actions that needed to be taken immediately. John sent the message through the station's communication network. To any alien monitoring the transmission, it would look like boring paperwork from a human maintenance worker. But John knew that within hours, his message would reach people who understood exactly what it meant. People who had been preparing for this possibility for years. The Council thought they were dealing with a primitive species that could be easily controlled or eliminated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. John walked into the Council chamber, carrying his tablet and a small portable projector. He looked the same as he had 3 days earlier, a maintenance worker in coveralls who seemed out of place among the galaxy's most powerful beings. The alien representatives watched him with what appeared to be amusement. Several made sounds that the translator interpreted as quiet laughter. They expected him to beg for mercy or make desperate promises about human improvement. John set his projector on the central platform and connected it to his tablet. "I've prepared a presentation about humanity's case," he said calmly. The crystal being's faceted surface reflected the chamber lights. "Proceed, human, though we doubt your primitive species can offer anything that will change our decision." John touched his tablet. The first image appeared on the large display screens around the chamber. It showed a star map with dozens of systems marked in red. 3 days ago, I knew very little about galactic politics, John began, but I've learned a lot since then. For example, I learned about the Kythera species. Several alien representatives shifted in their positions. The name Kythera caused a ripple of movement through the chamber. John touched his tablet again. The display showed historical records from the Council's own databases. The Kythera were declared unfit for independence 800 years ago. They were relocated to supervision worlds for developmental assistance. They were supposed to be guided until they could think and act properly. The insect-like being made clicking sounds. The Kythera case is not relevant to current proceedings. I think it is, John replied, because according to your own records, the Kythera were exterminated 300 years ago when they tried to resist their supervision. Their home planets were strip-mined for resources. The chamber grew very quiet. John could see that several alien representatives were looking at each other in what might have been concern. The Vorthak species suffered the same fate 400 years ago, John continued, showing more records. So did the Zephyrians, the Mollusk Collective, and 15 other species that went through your supervision program. John looked up at the 12 alien representatives. In fact, according to your own historical databases, no species has ever successfully graduated from Council supervision. They either become permanent servants, or they're eliminated when they resist. The floating metal spheres made a sound like grinding gears. These records are classified. How did you access them? I'm a maintenance worker. I have access to all the technical systems on this station, including your data storage networks. The tree being's silver bark seemed to ripple with agitation. You exceeded your authorized access. This is a violation of station protocols. Maybe, John said, but I also found something else interesting. He touched his tablet again. Records of a Council diplomatic ship that visited this station 2 weeks ago. The same time period when Earth's Ambassador Williams disappeared. The display showed shipping logs and security footage. The insect being that had spoken against humanity earlier shifted uncomfortably in its position. John highlighted specific data on the screen. The ship belonged to the hegemony species. It arrived without prior announcement and left 6 hours later. The timing matches exactly with when Ambassador Williams should have arrived for this council session. What are you suggesting? The crystal being asked, though its voice sounded less confident than before. I'm not suggesting anything, John replied. I'm stating facts. Ambassador Williams was murdered to prevent him from speaking at this session. His assassination gave you an excuse to proceed with humanity's supervision without proper representation. The chamber erupted in sounds from multiple alien species. Some sounded angry. Others sounded worried. The tree beings and the gas clouds appeared to be arguing with each other. John waited for the noise to die down, then continued. But that's not even the most interesting thing I discovered. He touched his tablet again. The display showed internal communication logs from several council species. 3 of your member species are here under threat rather than choice. The Convergence Hive Mind, the Zerion Crystal Collective, and the Tidal Federation are essentially prisoners who follow council orders because the alternative is extinction. Representatives from those 3 species made sounds that might have been shock or fear. 2 other species, the Living Forest and the Void Swimmers, have been planning to leave the council for decades. They're tired of being secondary partners in an alliance dominated by the original 3 species. John could see that his words were causing real disturbance among the aliens. Several were communicating with each other in rapid bursts of sound. But here's what's really interesting, John continued. The Council's power depends entirely on other species believing you're united and unstoppable. The truth is that you're barely holding together. You've been covering internal conflicts and rebellions for centuries. The insect being stood up abruptly. These accusations are meaningless. Humanity will still face supervision regardless of your primitive spy work. John looked at the insect being and smiled. Actually, I don't think so. He touched his tablet one final time. The display showed space around the council station. 20 human ships appeared on the sensors. The alien representatives stared at the screen in shock. The ships had appeared from nowhere, as if they had been invisible until that moment. Cloaking technology, John explained casually. Something we developed while you thought we were just primitive scavengers collecting space junk. Those old human merchant ships you've been laughing at for years, they're actually heavily armed military vessels. The chamber erupted in chaos. Multiple aliens were shouting at once. Security alarms began sounding throughout the station. John raised his voice to be heard over the noise. Earth's government has been aware of the Council's true nature for 3 years. We've been preparing for this exact situation. Every human ship that entered Council space was gathering intelligence and mapping your defenses. The crystal being's surface was pulsing with different colors. This is an act of war. No, John replied firmly. What you planned to do to humanity was an act of war. What you did to Ambassador Williams was an act of war. This is self-defense. John looked around the chamber at all 12 alien representatives. But I'm not here to fight a war if I don't have to. I'm here to offer you a better option. The floating metal spheres made a grinding sound. What option? Join us in creating something new, John said. A real alliance between equals, instead of a dictatorship disguised as a council. Species that want true cooperation can work together. Species that prefer independence can go their own way. John pointed to the display showing the human fleet. You can try to fight us, but you'll be fighting humans plus every species you've been oppressing for centuries. We've already made contact with resistance movements on 17 different worlds. The tree being's voice was quieter than before. And if we agree to your proposal, then we start over, John replied. We build a galactic federation based on cooperation instead of domination. No more supervision programs, no more forced integration, no more strip mining of inhabited worlds. John looked directly at the representatives from the 3 oppressed species. Everyone gets to choose their own path. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. John could see that several alien representatives were communicating privately through their own channels. Finally, the crystal being spoke. This is unprecedented. We need time to consider these proposals. You have 6 hours, John said. After that, my fleet will assume you've chosen to fight instead of negotiate. As John packed up his equipment and left the chamber, he could hear intense discussions beginning among the alien representatives. Some sounded angry. Others sounded relieved. John Morrison, maintenance worker from Luna Station, had just turned the most powerful government in the galaxy upside down. And he was just getting started. 4 hours after John's ultimatum, the first crack appeared in the Council's unity. The Convergence hive mind, one of the 3 oppressed species, sent a private message to John's quarters. The translation device converted their collective thoughts into simple words. We choose freedom. How do we help? John was not surprised. The Convergence had been forced to serve the Council for over 1,000 years. They had good reasons to want change. Within the next hour, 2 more species made contact. The Xerion Crystal Collective and the Tidal Federation both sent representatives to meet with John privately. They brought detailed information about Council military defenses and secret bases. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. The Living Forest, one of the original Council species, requested a private meeting. Their representative arrived at John's quarters, looking nervous. Tree-like beings did not usually show emotion, but this one's silver bark was shifting between different shades. Your proposal interests us, the forest representative said. Our people are tired of endless expansion and conquest. We want to return to our home systems and focus on growth instead of war. John sat back in his chair. This was better than he had hoped. What about your council allies? He asked. The hegemony and the crystal hierarchy will never agree to give up power, the forest representative replied. They believe in domination through force, but they are only 2 species out of 12. John nodded. And the others? He asked. Most are afraid to choose sides. They fear revenge from the dominant species. But if you can guarantee their safety— I can, John said. That's what the human fleet is for. Protection, not conquest. 2 hours before the deadline, the Void Swimmers also joined the rebellion. Their floating gas cloud forms appeared at the station, carrying intelligence about Council backup forces and hidden weapons. John spent the remaining time coordinating with the rebel species. Together, they controlled 6 out of 12 Council votes. More importantly, they had detailed knowledge of Council military capabilities and strategic weaknesses. When the deadline arrived, John walked back into the Council chamber. But this time, he was not alone. Representatives from 6 alien species stood with him. The remaining Council members looked smaller somehow. The crystal being's surface had lost its bright glow. The insect-like hegemony representative's red eyes seemed dim and uncertain. John took his position at the center platform. Have you made your decision? The crystal hierarchy representative, a floating collection of geometric shapes, spoke first. This rebellion will not succeed. We have allies throughout the galaxy, military forces you know nothing about. Actually, we know quite a lot about them, John replied. He touched his tablet, and the display showed detailed maps of Council military positions throughout the galaxy. 17 hidden bases, 47 patrol fleets, and 3 super dreadnought ships that you thought were secret. The hegemony insect being made clicking sounds of anger. How is this possible? John smiled. For 3 years, every human merchant ship, every mining operation, every maintenance crew that entered Council space was actually an intelligence-gathering mission. We've been mapping your entire civilization, while you thought we were just buying scrap metal and selling raw materials. You are playing a role, the crystal being said slowly, understanding beginning to show in its voice. Everything about humanity that you observed was carefully designed, John confirmed. Our environmental problems were mostly staged. We made Earth look less valuable than it actually is. Our conflicts were training exercises for asymmetric warfare. Our apparent technological limitations were deliberate misdirection. John gestured to his coveralls. Even me being here was planned. Do you really think Earth would send a random maintenance worker to the most important diplomatic meeting in human history? The chamber was completely silent except for the soft humming of the station's systems. John continued. My real name is Colonel John Morrison, former Director of Strategic Intelligence for Earth Command. I've been preparing for this mission for 2 years. The maintenance job was cover, while I studied Council technology and mapped your networks. The Void Swimmers made a sound that might have been amazement. The neural chaos that we detected in human brains. Quantum encryption, John explained. We developed it specifically to prevent telepathic species from reading our thoughts. Every human you've encountered has been mentally shielded without you realizing it. John looked around the chamber at the 6 remaining Council species. You have a choice now. You can try to fight a war against humans and half of your former allies. Or you can accept that the old system is finished and help us build something better. The crystal being's surface flickered through several colors before settling on a pale blue. What guarantees do we have? How do we know this new alliance will not simply replace Council domination with human domination? Because that's not what humans want, John replied. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be left alone to develop in our own way. The new Federation will have equal representation for all member species. No single species will have veto power over others. And those who prefer independence? Asked the Metal Sphere Collective. Free to go their own way, John said. No forced integration. No supervision programs. No strip mining of inhabited worlds. Species can join the Federation, remain independent, or form their own alliances as they choose. One by one, the remaining Council species began to indicate their acceptance. The Metal Spheres agreed first, followed by the Water-based Collective and the Energy Beings. Even the crystal beings eventually admitted that cooperation was better than destruction. Only the hegemony refused to accept the new arrangement. Their insect-like representatives stood up and made harsh clicking sounds. The hegemony does not negotiate with primitives. We will take our fleets and form our own alliance. You will regret this day. John nodded calmly. You're free to try, but I should mention that 18 of your colony worlds have already declared independence. Your military commanders are refusing orders. And your 3 vassal species have joined the Federation. The hegemony representative's red eyes grew brighter with anger, but it said nothing more. It left the chamber without another word. John watched it go, then turned back to the remaining representatives. Now we can begin building something new. 6 months later, John stood on the observation deck of Federation Station Alpha, formerly known as Council Station Nexus 7. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from dozens of species working together to modify the station's systems. The old council chambers had been converted into a democratic assembly hall where each species had equal representation. The supervision worlds had been liberated, and their populations were choosing their own governments. 3 former council species had chosen complete independence and were peacefully developing in their own regions of space. Earth was now a founding member of the Galactic Federation, but humans were just one voice among many. Some species wanted close cooperation with Earth's advanced stealth and intelligence technologies. Others preferred minimal contact, while they developed their own paths. John's role as Federation coordinator was supposed to be temporary until permanent institutions could be established. But somehow, he found himself busier than ever, helping resolve disputes and negotiate agreements between species that had never worked as equals before. His assistant, a young diplomatic officer from Earth, approached with the day's reports. Sir, we've received applications for Federation membership from 3 more species. Also, the hegemony has requested preliminary talks about possible cooperation agreements. Even the hegemony was learning that the galaxy had changed. Schedule the membership meetings for next week, John said. As for the hegemony, let them know we're interested in peaceful relationships with all species, but make it clear that the Federation operates on principles of equality and voluntary cooperation. As his assistant walked away to handle the scheduling, John looked out at the busy space lanes around the station. Human ships worked alongside vessels from the Crystal Collectives, the tree-being fleets, and dozens of other species. John Morrison had started this journey as a maintenance worker, fixing a broken water pump on Luna Station. He had ended up changing the structure of galactic civilization. But the most important change was not in the stars. It was in the simple idea that different species could work together as equals instead of rulers and servants. John pulled out his old tablet and opened a secure communication channel to Earth Command. Mission accomplished, Command, he typed. The garbage man strategy worked perfectly. Turns out everyone underestimates the guy who cleans up after them. He sent the message and went back to work. There was always something that needed fixing in the galaxy. But now, for the first time in thousands of years, fixing things meant building up instead of tearing down. John Morrison was still a maintenance worker at heart. He was just working on a much bigger project now.